and eventually a stoplight. A sand and gravel pit or two appeared, as did grain silos, a bandshell in the park, and a baseball field. Progress progressed, but only to a certain point. Nothing to get too worked up about. It's still a one-stoplight town, and most of the kids who grew up here and moved away as soon as they were able agree that Lake Woebegotton is a nice enough place to be from. Given what happened here, but happened even worse everywhere else, some of them probably wish they'd stayed. Day 1. Not too good a day, really, overall. 1. Fish icing. The winter the zombies came to Lake Woebegotton, and everywhere else on the planet too, of course, but let's not overreach here. Knowing your limitations is one of the first steps towards having a life that's not as miserable as it might be otherwise. Gunther Moncrief woke up in the deepest, darkest, coldest part of the night with a powerful need to urinate, and sat up in his old fish shack with the cracks in the walls stuffed with the crumpled pages from phone books, while the wind whistled through the holes he'd missed, and his little stove radiated weak heat, and the cot springs creaked under him, and he thought about how terrible it was to get old. Except being old and alive was better than all the alternatives, which were pretty grim if you dwelled on them, so better if you didn't. Could be worse, after all, could be worse. Still, the time was he could drink like a fish or a sailor and go to bed and sleep straight through the night and get up in the morning and let loose with a stream that sounded like a roaring river as it hit the toilet bowl, and then go out to the bar and do it all over again. But since he hit 60 or so, he developed what the fellas down at the backtrack bar called a girly bladder, and it seemed like he had to pee about 15 minutes after every time he took in a tablespoon of liquid. He thought about just picking a corner of the shack to let fly, but since he barely had room to turn around in here, it didn't seem like a good idea to make it any smellier than it already was. And the smell of piss had a way of cutting right through the smells of wood smoke and fish and old sweaty boots and moist coats, and making its presence known. He also considered taking a slug from the nice big bottle of bourbon he had tucked in cozy next to his cot, but the thought of pouring even another drop into his bursting bladder was too horrible to contemplate. Maybe even as bad as facing down a plate of lutefisk, or trying to repair a foreign car where everything was in metric. So he pulled on his boots over his thick socks and wrapped his big blanket around his long underwear, and opened the door to the shack, and yep, that was winter out there, the ice on the lake shining under the moon and starlight. But even though the end of his nose went numb right away, it wasn't as cold as the first time he went fishing with his father as a boy. The coldest winter on record hereabouts, when your ears would pretty much just turn to ice and snap right off as soon as you poked your head outside. Gunther crunched a couple of steps away from the door. The top layer of snow turned into a hard shell of ice, and pulled open the flap of his long underwear, an ice wind taking that opportunity to swoop in and freeze his nethers. He went ahead and did his business, steam rising up from the snow, and thought about the story his father used to tell about his old friend Johnny, who went outside to pee one night and got caught in a sudden cold snap, and they found him the next morning, frozen through and through like an ice cube, his urine frozen too in midstream, still attached to him, so he looked like a statue, or maybe more like an obscene kind of sculptural fountain like they might have in San Francisco, which Gunther's father always, without fail, called San Sodom Francisco Gomorrah, though he got a wistful, faraway look, too, when he talked about the times he'd been on leave there during the war, as if, for a den of relentless iniquity, it hadn't been so bad. It wasn't that cold tonight, not even so cold that your piss froze part way down and hit the ice at your feet with a tinkle, but it was cold enough. Gunther started to put himself away and hot-footed back to the relative coziness of his little wooden shack on the shore, when the sky overhead lit up, brighter than noontime, and he shaded his eyes and tilted back his head, and there, in the great black sky